Hello, good morning, and welcome to the Hard Sell, the show where the stick rattles back. It's time once again to break our fast with a choice of cereals with milk, or perhaps something even less exotic. But what to choose? Help us out, advertising. Again. Last time I looked at the most important meal of the day, apart from pinner, I mostly concentrated on what might be labelled, often unfairly, kiddie cereals. Sugar puffs, Cocoa Pops, Frosties, the ones that taste nice.
You too can have a breakfast like mine.
So let's start by looking at some stone-faced
Special K
grown-up cereals.
with delicious malty flakes.
Reduce cholesterol.
Has only
and such.
190 calories.
Oat bran.
Oat bran.
May help
Eating
reduce
a sensible
cholesterol.
diet,
May help reduce
every little
cholesterol.
helps.
As part of a low-fat
Get in
diet.
shape.
Medical experts
Lose
suggest
the
2
fat.
out of 3 people would be wise to consider reducing their cholesterol. So it's common sense to care about what you eat. Couldn't someone in your life use a little common sense?
There's a certain amount of gender confusion in the selling of these things, particularly after the early 90s. Of course, it is a woman's duty to always be desirable, and that means not fat. So it's a no-brainer to have these aimed at the she-types. But the rise of the sensitive new man in the early 90s made this sort of thing more confusing than it had been before. Up to the 80s, the women had had their slimming Special K, all close-ups of trim thighs and pert buttocks.
You too can have a breakfast like mine. The Kellogg's Special K breakfast with delicious malty flakes has only 190 calories. When you're eating a sensible diet, every little helps. Get in shape, lose the fat.
The male equivalent was the sporty likes of Start, full of physical activity and masculine posing and the granite-hard thighs of the likes of Steve Cram.
Crunchy, honey, malty. Start the taste from Kellogg's.
But this is common sense. I mean, the product is common sense. Advertising isn't. Advertising has never had anything much to do with common sense. No, this is Kellogg's Common Sense Oat Bran Flakes. Basically Special K in a different box. We met them the first time around as well. Then they were trying to be whimsical. This one's from a couple of years later and has clearly given up and simply reformatted the usual formula to include a bloke. Common Sense was effectively an attempt at selling Special K to men. This advert itself centres around a male avatar, being tormented by a woman and by the disembodied voice of Anton Rogers.
Couldn't someone in your life use a little common sense?
Eventually everyone just became guilty enough about their personal health that there was no real need to genderise anymore. Although Special K is still for women. Slimming is something entirely different.
Get in shape, lose the fat.
Of course, in this day and age, with the obesity crisis spreading wide rife and our nation's children little more than a collection of red-faced, insulin-dependent blobs shoveling pure fat and sugar into their greedy little chops, while their parents shrug their shoulders and say, well, at least they're quiet, as is my understanding from media reportage, the days of ultra-sugary cereals are numbered. Sugar Puffs are now half as sweet, and known as Honey Monster Puffs, with a rustic and outdoorsy new image, emphasising honey over sugar. If that makes no sense to you, play some word association. First thing that comes into your head from honey is usually a bee, or a beehive, or some other natural thing. A positive image, at least in the context that the advertisers are playing around it. Whereas sugar, which is of course no less natural, generally yields an image of an impersonal white substance in a bowl or a box, something vaguely chemical looking, which for the advertiser's purposes is a definite negative. It bears repeating that neither one is actually more all-natural than the other, but society's perceptions, largely unconscious perceptions at that, essentially allow honey to fake it. Semiotics is fun. Not all cereals were as lucky as Sugar Puffs to be able to use a combination of recipe tweaking and applied semiotics to survive the sugar war. Perhaps the highest profile casualty is Kellogg's Ricicles, or Frosted Rice Krispies as they're called in America. Like Frosted Flakes, a name so brutally utilitarian it's basically just a bald encyclopedic description. Ricicles are, or were, as delicious as they were staggeringly bad for you. So it's a shame, but not a surprise, that they're dead now. They had a lot of mascots over the years. When they were launched in the 60s, they made a deal with walking sausage factory of middle-class Englishness, Enid Blyton, to have her popular Noddy character on the front of the box and on advertising. The reliably simpering little Tory Pinocchio was usually depicted on screen as a rickety old wooden puppet, and could be quite eerie.
Bicycles and bicycles and bicycles. I'm having a bicycles party and I want you all to join in. We all like bicycles and bicycles and nice. Ting, ting.
Or sometimes downright terrifying.
Hello? What's all this? Why, it's me! All about me on every packet of Kellogg's Sugar Ricicles.
In the late 70s, Ricicles were presumably suffering a little in the sales, and so Kellogg's decided to tie it in with their other frosted variant on an extant brand, Frosties.
Dad! Dad! Are you on a diet, Dad?
What's up, Tony Jr.?
Hey, look! Kellogg's is giving me my very own cereal.
The magical parthenogenesis of marketing provided Tony the Tiger with a son, logically if unimaginatively named Tony Jr., and he was handed the Ricicles brief.
Ricicles? What are ricicles, son?
Look! Super little puffs of crispy rice.
But why ricicles?
Because they've got this lovely crunchy frosting, Dad. That's what makes them Ricicles!
Oh, that's my boy.
But his lack of discernible personality and inability, unlike his father, to come up with a catchphrase beyond just bellowing the cereal's name, meant his time as spokescat was limited.
That's my Ricicles!
Apparently, for a time in the early 80s, Ricicles' mascot was Henry's cat, which is cool, but no documentary evidence for it exists, sadly. By the mid-80s, the brand had finally settled on its most enduring mascot, a round-headed Lego astronaut named Captain Rick. Popular culture was still tasting the backwash of the now completed Star Wars trilogy, which is a pretentious way of saying that space was cool. Hence, struggling and B-list brands creating new or adapting existing mascots in a cod science fiction vein. Like Spaceman Spiff here. Captain Rick never really had a backstory as such. He just flew about your average rocky planetoids with starfield backgrounds, encountering possibly the stupidest aliens in advertising history.
Captain Rick was on his perilous journey from planet Rikon with your favorite Kellogg's Ricicles, when suddenly...
Are you a space explorer?
I'm Captain Rick, space explorer extraordinaire.
We space explorers?
You don't see many of them round here, do you?
No, we don't, do we?
For your free magic space mask from Captain Rick, send 2 tokens from special packs of Kellogg's Ricicles.
I'm not sure that even really counts as tricking them, because a trick surely would require the whole exchange to make at least some sense. Still, Captain Rick caught on like no Ricicles spokesbeing had since Noddy, and the cereal enjoyed a reasonably popular run in the 80s and 90s. Sadly, this came to a screeching halt once Lucky Charms came along. You remember Lucky Charms. Or if you're American, you don't have to. You can just fix yourself a bowl, right now.
It's Lucky, the leprechaun.
Uh-oh!
Let's get his Lucky Charms.
They're after me new Lucky Charms. I use me magic to escape. Delicious cereal full of magic surprises. Me new Lucky Charms. Crispy mallow pink hearts, orange stars, yellow moons, even white diamonds. With this delicious frosted oat cereal, we're gonna have a great breakfast. Whoa!
I've got him. Great.
Frosted Lucky Charms. They're magically delicious.
Yeah, the adverts were the same over here. I say were because they were only on sale for a few years in this country. American cereals are famous for being explicitly and shamelessly appalling for you. But they didn't start out that way. It was a gradual process, from Super Sugar Crisp Simple Sugar Puffs to the psychotic likes of Count Chocula or Reese's Peanut Butter Breakfast Crunch. We hadn't gone through that process. Ricicles were about as hardcore as it got over here, so chucking the frosted marshmallow nightmare of Lucky Charms straight at us was like hurling us straight into the deep end. Unlike the Americans, we just weren't equipped to ignore how terrible these things were, and so they slowly disappeared by the early aughties. But not before temporarily becoming the biggest cereal in the country and introducing us to the whole breakfast marshmallow concept. Several imitators inevitably arrived, but the worst impact by far was on Ricicles.
Hiya, Captain Rick here. Guess what? Ricicles have now got super duper hypergalactic space-shaped marshmallow pieces in them. Kellogg's Ricicles, part of your complete cosmic breakfast.
That's right, marshmallow pieces floating in sugar-frosted Rice Krispies. I mean, at that point you're basically eating pure sugar with the side order of food dye. They even had to resort to the old part of this complete breakfast shot, which isn't a legal requirement in this country, to try and make it seem less like they were actively poisoning your children. After a couple of years of making the heads of the kids of Britain pound like steam hammers, the marshmallows were dropped. Despite Captain Rick being given a kidified makeover that made him look even more like Spaceman Spiff, Ricicles never got their momentum back, and their relatively low sales made them the obvious choice when the current backlash against sugar demanded sacrificial blood.
Kellogg's Ricicles, part of your complete cosmic breakfast.
Lucky Charms was far from alone in its Atlantic crossing. For whatever reason, maybe Thatcher deregulated the cereal market or something, I don't know, the late 80s and early 90s saw loads of American cereals attempting to make the leap. Probably the only ones to find lasting success were Pop-Tarts, because they were a completely new idea.
Get up, get up, get up.
To Kellogg's Pop-Tarts, put them in the toaster.
Like Pop-Tarts.
Revolutionize your breakfast.
Kellogg's Pop-Tarts.
Oh, great flavors and they're waiting for you. Kellogg's Pop-Tarts, so hot they're cool.
And even they weren't truly massive for more than the first couple of months, specifically the period between the launch of the new product and the first few dozen newspaper stories of people ending up with third-degree burns on the insides of their mouths. An American cereal that seemed like a decent bet for UK success was Corn Pops. Fortunately, the UK version of the brand didn't go with the terrifying US advertising strategy where being denied the cereal drives kids genuinely insane to the point of murder or self-harm.
Are you gonna sleep all day? I got an idea. Let's get some corn pops. We don't have any. They don't have Kellogg's Corn Pops? Get serious. I am. She isn't. Oh, like sweet, crunchy popcorn. I can almost taste it. And I'm not spending my weekend with someone who snores, which I'm gonna tell everybody at school if I can't have my pops.
Come on, girls. I bought those corn pops. Want a bowl?
Well, sure, if that's what you got.
Kellogg's Corn Pop cereal is part of this complete breakfast.
I gotta have my pops.
Instead, they went with the then standard method of just having N. Rytel free associating on the product's name and description, or just whatever came to mind.
Have you caught new Corn Pops? They taste just like crunchy popcorn.
They're new from Kellogg's. The great taste of crunchy popcorn. They're from They're great as part of this nutritious breakfast.
tastes like crunchy popcorn. You've got to catch new corn pops.
This mustn't have been an effective advert because I remember genuinely wanting corn pops when they were launched, probably because of the idea that it was like popcorn for breakfast. The thing is, it isn't. At all. Anything much like popcorn. It's vaguely like eating the inside of a crunchy bar, only harder and less pleasant. It certainly isn't nice enough to lead to frothing psychotic insanity. Call the police.
Gotta have my pops.
Bollocks to cereals, though. There are other choices and mountains of sugar and carbohydrate, like fried fat and protein. Bacon was a breakfast staple until it was finally freed from its single meal status by Major Benet himself.
Gone are the days when bacon was exclusive to breakfast.
Famously, the first breakfast TV advert in the country was for bacon and also some sausages.
Morning, I'm Ian Melrose, I'm from Walls, and I'd like to welcome you to Walls Breakfast Television. It's my job to make sure there's plenty for everyone. We'll feature some big and tasty names, so make sure you tune in to Walls Sausages and Bacon. No other breakfast television tastes as good.
The first breakfast TV adverts in this country were Spartan affairs due to the first of many disputes between the station TBAM and the unions, in this case Equity. Many companies turned to their backroom staff to act as pitchmen. Ian Melrose, marketing and sales director of pork specialists Walls, does his best to sell you the stuff, but ultimately crashes against a brick wall of anti-charisma. Despite this, he continued to be heard, if not seen, on TBAM scheduled Walls adverts for a little while longer, just because they couldn't hire anyone else. We heard him narrating a pork pie metaphor in an earlier episode of this programme.
Walls pork pies with the rich, crisp pastry are great at any time of the day.
To be honest, the sausages and bacon do a far better job of selling themselves than Ian Melrose does, sizzling away all plump and moist.
We'll feature some big and tasty names.
Apologies to vegetarian viewers. Stare at the mushrooms, I guess.
So make sure you tune in to Walls Sausages and Bacon. No other breakfast television tastes as good.
But as everyone knows, the best bacon is Danish bacon. And everyone knows this because it's been advertised as such for decades, and because no other sort of bacon trumpets its country of origin quite so loudly.
Danish.
Ah, Danish.
Ah, Danish.
Delicious Danish.
Delicious Danish.
Tasty Danish.
Tasty Danish.
Snacks with Danish.
Snacks with Danish.
It has to be Danish.
Has to be Danish. Danish.
But what is it about Danish bacon that makes it so good? What do they do differently to everyone else that sets them apart? What is so special about Danish bacon? Well, I've looked it up, and as far as I can tell, the answer is nothing. They just have a really good export business, and an even better marketing department. There's nothing inherently superior about Danish bacon, as compared to any old supermarket bought cured pig meat, that isn't also true of bacon from your local quality butchers. It just comes from further away. But because they have a little stamp with their name on it, and various adverts crowing about how great it is, everyone just assumes Danish bacon is better in some way. It becomes special solely because it's decorated to transmit the message that it is special at such volume and length that before long everyone genuinely just assumes it is special. Self-fulfilling marketing. Semiotics is fun.
There's nothing much nicer than the nicest slice, and the nicer slice is Danish. Ooh, it's the nicest slice to cook and the nicest slice to serve. Danish is the nicest to slice, so whichever way you slice it. Oh, there's nothing much nicer than the nicest slice, and the nicest slice is Danish.
Well, I've gone on for so long now that it's actually lunchtime. Time for a bacon sandwich, I think. Major Benet says it's okay. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to support me on Patreon so I can do both these programs and eating. Please don't make me choose. You'll get your name in the credits with a title whose glitziness corresponds with your generosity, and from next week you'll get the chance to read and help shape my colossal history of the BBC, Rule the Waves. It's basically BBC in the face, except it's a book. I'm very excited about it, so should you be, and for less than $1 a month you could be reading it from next week. Join now! I said now!